The Eternal Hunger is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual events, locations, or persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. This story contains themes of horror and supernatural elements intended for a mature audience. Reader discretion is advised. The author is not responsible for any emotional or psychological distress caused by engaging with this content. Chapter 1: A Return to Shadows. I hadn't been back to Ashford in years. When I left, it was to escape, to run away from the oppressive weight of the town, from the ever-watchful eyes of its people. I remember how suffocating it felt, how the air seemed thick with secrets that everyone but me knew. The small town hadn't changed much over the years, but it felt different this time. Maybe it was the season, late October, when the cold winds arrived early and the fog crept in at night like something living, but I felt it in my bones. Something was wrong. I had no intention of coming back. I never did. But when my sister called, her voice trembling, telling me that our grandmother had passed, I felt the familiar pull of obligation. She didn't say much at first, just that the house needed to be cleaned out, that the property needed to be sold. She couldn't handle it on her own, and despite everything, I couldn't leave her alone. It was strange, I thought, how the death of a person could affect a place. When I was a child, I loved my grandmother's house. It was big, ancient even, full of the kind of mystery that could only exist in a home that had stood for over a century. The house was a Victorian monstrosity with peeling white paint and shutters that hung crooked on the second floor. The creaky floors, the wide stairs that groaned underfoot, it had always been a place full of secrets. Or maybe I just imagined them. I remember the stories she told me when I was young, how she warned me never to go into the attic or the basement alone, how she'd always speak in low whispers about the things that lived in the walls. Back then, it was all just old tales meant to scare me into staying in bed at night. But now, I wasn't sure. When I arrived in Ashford, I felt the familiar weight of the place settle on me. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The streets were empty, no one around except for the occasional dog trotting by, its leash dragging in the dust. The houses were close together, a maze of little cottages and old buildings that seemed to have been frozen in time. As I passed by the old church at the edge of town, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. It wasn't just the old stone and the cracked stained glass windows. It was the feeling of being watched, as though the town had eyes that saw everything, and they were all on me. My sister Emily met me at the house. She hadn't changed much, still tall, back, still with that nervous energy I remembered from our childhood. But there was something different in her eyes, something that wasn't there before. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I noticed it the moment she opened the door to greet me. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice soft, almost distant. I followed her inside, and the smell of dust and old wood hit me immediately. The house hadn't been lived in for months, and the silence inside was unnerving. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like the house was holding its breath, as though it was waiting for something or someone to break the stillness. "I know it's a lot to ask," Emily said, her eyes scanning the room as if she expected something to leap out at her. "But I don't know what to do with all of this. Everything's just wrong here." "Wrong?" I asked, unsure of what she meant. "It's just a house, Em." She shook her head, her face pale. "It's not just the house, Ethan. It's the land, the house. There's something off about it. I don't know how to explain it." I tried to reassure her, but the moment I stepped into the house, I could feel it too. It wasn't just the damp smell or the dust-covered furniture. There was a presence here, something I couldn't see but could definitely feel, something waiting in the shadows. After a long, silent pause, Emily spoke again. "Grandma's room is upstairs. I can't bring myself to go in there. Will you do it?" I didn't want to. I didn't want to go up to that room, but I couldn't say no. I couldn't leave my sister to deal with it alone. So I nodded, and with a deep breath, I ascended the stairs, the old wood creaking under my weight. The house was too quiet. Grandma's room was at the end of the hallway, the last door on the left. I could feel the chill in the air as I approached it, the air thick with the scent of old books, lavender, and something else I couldn't place, something bitter. The door was ajar, and I pushed it open, stepping into the room. It was just as I remembered. The same old wooden furniture, the same faded curtains, the same thick woolen blankets draped over the bed. But something was wrong. It didn't feel like my grandmother's room anymore. It felt abandoned, haunted, like someone or something had been waiting here. I looked around, my eyes drawn to the small bookshelf in the corner, where several old leather-bound books sat on the shelf. I wasn't sure what possessed me, but I stepped forward and pulled one of them off the shelf. It was heavy in my hands, and the pages inside were yellowed with age. It was a journal, filled with my grandmother's neat, flowing handwriting. The entries were cryptic at best, filled with strange references to rituals, to the thinning veil between the worlds on Samhain night. I chuckled nervously, thinking it was all some sort of superstition, just old family lore passed down through generations. But the more I read, the more unsettled I became. There were mentions of things in the attic, things that had been waiting for the right time to awaken. The final entry was scrawled frantically, the words barely legible. "The veil will tear. They are coming. I cannot stop it. I am not strong enough." I slammed the journal shut, my heart pounding. The room felt colder now, and I could swear I heard something moving behind me. A rustle, a soft scratching noise like nails on wood. I whipped around, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. Just the stillness of the room. But something was wrong. I could feel it. The house was changing, shifting, as if it were coming alive again after years of dormancy. As I left the room, the wind picked up outside, rattling the old windows, and I could have sworn I heard someone whisper my name. I froze in the hallway, the coldness seeping into my bones, and for a moment I felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes watching me. Chapter 2, Beneath the Surface. The moment I closed the door behind me, I knew something had changed in the house. It was like the walls themselves had shifted. The familiar hum of the old house, that dull creak of wooden beams settling, was gone. Now the silence was thick, oppressive. It pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I found Emily in the living room, sitting on the couch with her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her eyes were wide, almost frantic. "I heard you go up there," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "What did you find?" I hesitated. I didn't want to tell her about the journal. Not yet. I didn't want to scare her more than she already was. But I couldn't lie to her either. Nothing. Just some old books. "Grandma's stuff," I said, my words feeling hollow as I spoke them. But the image of that last journal entry, the frantic scribbles about the veil and them, hung in my mind like a shadow, and I couldn't shake it. "I'll go through the rest of the house. Maybe we'll find something useful." Emily's expression softened, but the tension was still. She didn't believe me. Not completely. Her gaze flicked to the stairs, her brow furrowed as though there was something unsaid, something that lingered between us. But she didn't press me. Instead, she just nodded. "I'll stay down here," she murmured, her voice almost too calm. You take care of things up there. Please." I couldn't understand it. Emily was always the stronger one, the one who held it together when everything fell apart. But now, she seemed so fragile. The change in her was unsettling, like she was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. I turned and walked down the hall toward the staircase, but before I reached the stairs, I heard something behind me. A whisper, soft like a breath just over my shoulder. "Ethan." I froze. My name, whispered from somewhere close, yet no one was there. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing, only the hallway stretching into darkness. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling. The house had been abandoned for months. Of course, the sounds of wind and settling wood would play tricks on you. But something deep inside me told me that it wasn't the house settling. It was something else. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step creaking under my weight. The hallway at the top felt colder, like the air had thickened somehow, pressing in on me. I glanced down the narrow passage, the doors of the bedrooms lining the walls like silent sentinels. My grandmother's room was the farthest down the hall, and it had always felt off, even when I was a kid. But I couldn't avoid it now. I needed to figure out what had happened here. I pushed open the door to the room beside Grandma's, the one that had been mine when I visited as a child. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tightly against the light. But something made me hesitate before stepping inside. The air felt wrong, as if it was holding its breath. When I flipped the light switch, the bulb flickered, then sputtered to life, casting harsh shadows on the walls. The room was just as I remembered it, a bed with a faded quilt, a small dresser, a rocking chair in the corner. But it felt different now. The walls seemed to close in around me, and for a moment the silence was so deep I couldn't even hear my own breath. That's when I saw it. A small object on the floor by the bed, something shiny. I stepped closer, the air growing colder as I crouched down. It was a pendant, silver with intricate carvings etched into it. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. The carvings were strange, unfamiliar, and then I saw the inscription on the back. For the night shall come when the veil breaks and the shadows walk among us. The word sent a chill down my spine. It was a message, a warning. But from who? And why was it here in my grandmother's room? Suddenly, I heard a soft rustling from the hallway, followed by a low creak from the attic. My heart skipped a beat. I stood up quickly, my mind racing. Was someone up there? The scratching noise from earlier echoed in my mind, and for the first time, the house didn't feel like an abandoned relic. It felt like a living, breathing thing, aware of my presence, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I moved to the door and stepped back into the hallway, the pendant still gripped tightly in my hand. The air in the hallway had grown even colder, the shadows stretching like fingers along the walls. I glanced at the attic door, which was now slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness visible beyond it. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was up there, something that had been waiting for me. Without thinking, I walked toward the attic door, my pulse quickening. The house was silent again, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for me to step into the unknown. I reached out and pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. The attic was even colder than before, the temperature dropping sharply, as if I had entered another world entirely. The only light came from the weak bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. My eyes scanned the room, taking in the clutter of old furniture, boxes, and forgotten memories. But there was nothing there, nothing except the feeling of being watched. I took a step forward, the floorboards creaking underfoot. The scent of mildew and dust hung in the air, but there was something else, a sharp, acrid smell like something rotting. And then I heard it, a low, guttural sound like something scraping against wood. It came from the far corner of the attic, where the shadows were darkest. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It was close, too close. The sound stopped, silence, then a whisper, faint but unmistakable, floated through the room. Leave. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I turned and ran down the stairs, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The floor seemed to shift beneath me, as though the house itself was alive and trying to swallow me whole. I stumbled into the living room, gasping for air, my hands shaking. Emily was sitting there, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I heard it. I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. The whisper. It told me to leave. Emily stood up, her face pale. It's not just the house, Ethan. It's the land. It's everything here. Before I could respond, the wind outside howled, rattling the windows, and the temperature dropped even further. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch longer, darker. I could feel the weight of something in the house with us, pressing in from every side. We have to leave, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Now, before it's too late. But as I turned to leave, I knew something deeper was at play. I didn't understand it, but I knew the house wasn't letting us go that easily. Chapter 3, The Veil Between Us. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind that rattled the windows, every shadow that seemed to stretch unnaturally in the corners of the rooms. It felt deliberate, like the house was watching us, listening, waiting for the right moment to strike. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that something was coming. Something old. Something that had been waiting for this very moment to awaken. As Emily and I stood there in the living room, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken fears, the wind outside grew fiercer, howling like a wild beast. The windows rattled in their frames, and I felt a cold draft slip through the cracks, cutting through the room like a knife. Emily's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but her lips trembled as she spoke. "We shouldn't have come back, Ethan. This place, it's cursed. I can feel it. I felt it the moment we arrived." I opened my mouth to reassure her, to tell her that it was just nerves, that we were overthinking it, but the words caught in my throat. How could I tell her that I felt it too? That something was very wrong, and that I didn't know how to stop it? The wind was so loud now that it drowned out everything else, rattling the house from the outside in, as if it were trying to tear the building apart. A thudding noise came from upstairs, followed by a long, drawn-out scrape of wood against wood, like something dragging itself across the floor. My heart leapt into my throat. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't just the house settling. Something was up there. Something that hadn't been there before. I glanced at Emily, who was staring at the staircase with wide, panicked eyes, as though she had heard it too. She slowly backed away from the hallway, her hands pressed tightly against her chest. "I think we need to leave. We need to go now," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind's howling. I nodded, the instinct to run clawing at me, but I couldn't do it. Something kept me rooted in place, some deep, unspoken need to find out what was happening here, to uncover the truth of what Grandma had left behind. My fingers tightened around the pendant in my pocket. It was still cold in my hand, its strange carvings haunting me with every beat of my heart. "Ethan," Emily said, her voice shaking. "Please, don't go up there. Don't go into the attic. You don't understand. You don't know what it'll do." I felt the words she spoke twist in my chest. She was right to be afraid, but I didn't know why. Why was I compelled to confront whatever lay upstairs? What was this pull, this need to face whatever was lurking in the shadows? "Stay here," I said, my voice firm despite the unease that had taken root deep inside me. "I'll be back. I'll check it out, and then we'll leave. We'll leave this place for good." She didn't respond at first, just stood there, her eyes pleading with me to reconsider. But in the end, she nodded reluctantly. I turned, my feet heavy on the floor as I moved toward the staircase. Each step felt like an eternity as I climbed, the wooden stairs creaking beneath me, groaning in protest as though they too wanted me to turn back. The air was colder now, thick with an oppressive silence, and I could feel the walls around me pressing in tighter. The scent of mildew and dust had grown stronger, and with it, the unmistakable scent of something foul, something rotting. The attic door was ajar once more, just like before, the faintest hint of darkness beyond it. I felt the weight of it pressing against me, pulling at me, urging me to step into that shadowy void. I had to go. There was no turning back. I placed my hand on the door handle, and as soon as I touched it, a jolt of cold shot through my body, as if the door itself had been waiting for me. I could feel the breath of something ancient behind the door, something old and hungry. The air was thick with it, thick with dread. I pushed the door open, stepping into the attic, and for the first time since arriving in Ashford, I felt the full force of its weight. It was like a physical presence, wrapping itself around me, binding me to this place. The attic was as it had been before, dark, dusty, and cluttered with old furniture and forgotten memories. But something was different this time. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore. They were shifting, stretching, flickering like they were alive. My heart thudded in my chest, and I stepped deeper into the room, my eyes scanning every corner, every inch of the space. And then I saw it. At the far end of the attic, near the window, there was a tall, blackened wooden chest, one that I hadn't noticed before. It was covered in dust, but the edges were burned, charred like it had been touched by fire. The chest seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and I could feel it in my bones, the pull of it, calling me closer. I approached it slowly, my hands trembling, my breath shallow. The closer I got, the more oppressive the air became. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, the shadows growing thicker with each step. When I reached the chest, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lid, unsure whether to open it. But something in me, the same instinct that had brought me here, urged me to lift it. I grabbed the lid and pulled. It creaked open with a sound that echoed in the silence, a sound that felt wrong, like something was being released. Inside, there was a bundle of old, tattered cloth covered in dust and cobwebs. I reached inside and pulled it out, my fingers brushing against something cold, something hard beneath the fabric. When I unraveled the cloth, my blood ran cold. It was a mask, a wooden mask, intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize, painted in colors that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. But what made my stomach turn wasn't the mask itself. It was the feeling of it, the presence of it. It felt alive, as though it were waiting for something. A sound came from behind me, a low, guttural growl. I froze. The attic was darker now, the shadows deeper, as if they had gathered around me, closing in from all sides. And then I saw it. A figure in the corner of the room. Tall, gaunt, with skin stretched too tight over its bones. Its eyes were hollow, black pits, and its mouth hung open, twisted in a grotesque grin. It was watching me. I didn't move. I couldn't move. My mind screamed for me to run, to get out of there, but my body wouldn't respond. The figure took a slow step forward, its limbs jerking unnaturally with each movement. It was getting closer. I dropped the mask, my hands shaking uncontrollably. It hit the floor with a dull thud. "Ethan?" The voice came from everywhere at once, a low, echoing whisper that seemed to come from inside my own head. And then, in an instant, the figure lunged. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, my mind reeling. The attic seemed to implode around me, the shadows closing in, suffocating me. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The figure was gone. The room was empty. But I could still hear the whispering, still feel its presence, hovering just out of reach, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. I couldn't explain what had just happened, but one thing was clear. We weren't alone here. And we never had been. Chapter 4. The Weight of the Past. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring at the empty corner of the attic where the figure had been. My body was numb, my mind racing to comprehend what had just happened. I could still hear the whispering, faint and indistinct, but it seemed to echo in my skull. I could still feel its cold presence, like it was pressing against my chest, suffocating me. The shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should, curling in on themselves as though they had lives of their own. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting from one dark corner of the room to the next, expecting the figure to materialize again, to pounce on me from the shadows. But nothing moved. The attic was still, save for the whispering. It was faint, like the rustle of dry leaves or a soft breeze through dead branches, but the more I listened, the clearer it became, the more I realized what it was saying. Return, return, return. It wasn't a plea, it was a command. I felt an overwhelming pressure to leave, to run out of the attic, to get as far away from this cursed house as possible. But my feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. The words return had burrowed into my mind like a parasite that refused to let go. I had to know more. My eyes locked onto the mask that I had dropped earlier, the one that seemed to be calling me. It was resting on the floor, half hidden in the shadows, its painted face staring up at me. It felt wrong, unnatural, as though it didn't belong in this world. The symbols on it were still unfamiliar, but they seemed to hum with a strange energy vibrating in the silence of the room. I reached down almost instinctively and picked it up again. The moment my fingers brushed its surface, I felt it. An electric jolt that ran up my arm and into my chest, as if the mask had just come to life in my hands. My breath hitched, and I almost dropped it. But somehow I held on, drawn to it, pulled toward it as though it were the key to understanding everything. I had to know. But then from the corner of my eye, I saw something else. A glimmer of movement. At first, it was nothing but a flicker, a shadow perhaps. But then the shape became clearer. It wasn't just a shadow, it was a figure. One that was slowly emerging from the darkness, stepping forward as though it were just as real as I was. I whipped around, my heart racing. The attic door was wide open. It hadn't been before. Emily, she'd been right to stay downstairs. She had begged me to leave this cursed place, but now it was too late. The figure was tall, its frame elongated and twisted, its limbs impossibly long. Its face was hidden by the hood of a tattered cloak, but I could see its hands, skeletal and blackened as though they had been burned beyond recognition. And its eyes, those empty, soulless pits, stared at me, or at least I felt them staring. There was no expression, no emotion. It was as if it had no need for those things. "Return," it whispered, its voice a low rasp that scraped against my skull like nails on a chalkboard. The sound vibrated through my bones, rattling me to the core. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I was caught in the grip of something ancient, something that was far beyond anything I could understand. The figure stepped closer, its movements smooth and unnaturally fluid, like it was gliding through the air rather than walking on the floor. And as it drew near, I realized something terrible. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't human. Not anymore. It was a manifestation of something darker, something that had been waiting in the shadows for a long, long time. My legs finally found the strength to move, and I turned to flee, but just as I took a step toward the door, the entire attic seemed to shift. The shadows stretched out like hands, reaching for me, wrapping around my legs, pulling me back. I gasped, trying to pull away, but the darkness tightened its grip. I could feel it then, the weight of the past, the weight of everything that had happened in this house, in this land, the curse that had taken hold. I could feel it in my bones, in the very air around me. It was suffocating. It was consuming me. Leave this place. The figure rasped, its voice growing louder, more insistent. You do not belong here. Return to where you came from, or suffer the consequences. But there was no time to process its words, no time to think about what it meant, what it wanted. The darkness was thick now, almost solid, and it was closing in on me. I couldn't move. I was trapped. Then from behind me, a scream. A sharp, piercing scream that shattered the silence of the attic. It was Emily. My heart lurched in my chest and I fought against the shadows, my hands clawing at the thick, unnatural darkness that surrounded me. Emily! I shouted her name, but the words were swallowed by the storm of shadows. My body burned with the effort to break free, but it was like trying to fight against a wall of iron. The whispering was deafening now, overwhelming. And then I heard it. The sound of something scratching, dragging across the floor. The attic door slammed shut with a violent bang, locking me inside. I screamed again, my fists pounding against the walls, against the door, but there was nothing on the other side. And then I realized, the figure wasn't here to harm me. It wasn't here to kill me. It was here for something else. It was here for Emily, and I had to save her. I ripped the door open, finally breaking free from the grip of the shadows, but when I stepped into the hallway, I froze. There was no sign of Emily. The house was quiet, too quiet. The oppressive silence of the attic seemed to have followed me, like a heavy cloak draped around my shoulders. My breath was shallow, my hands trembling. Emily? I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. The shadows in the hallway were thick, moving as though they had a life of their own. I felt them closing in, felt them pushing against me, but I couldn't focus on them. I had to find her. I had to get to her before a sudden crash from upstairs, a loud thud, an unmistakable sound of a door slamming open. I ran toward the staircase, my heart pounding in my chest, the air growing colder with every step. My legs were heavy, like they were moving through water, but I pushed on, driven by desperation, by the need to find Emily. I burst into Grandma's room, the door swinging open with a violent force, but when I looked inside, I found nothing. The room was empty, but something had changed. On the floor, in the center of the room, was an old, tattered rug. I didn't remember it being there before. I didn't remember ever seeing it at all. My stomach twisted. Something felt wrong. So wrong. I dropped to my knees, my hands shaking as I pulled the rug back. Beneath it, there was a hatch. A small wooden hatch that hadn't been there when I first entered the room. Without thinking, I opened it, and that's when I saw her. Emily was lying in the darkness, her eyes wide open but lifeless. Her mouth was agape in a silent scream, her hands reaching towards something that wasn't there. And the shadows, they were already closing in. Chapter 5. Beneath the Surface. I couldn't breathe. The air felt too thick, too oppressive, as if the very walls of the house were closing in on me. My hands shook uncontrollably as I knelt beside Emily's lifeless body, her cold fingers still outstretched, as though reaching for something that I couldn't see. Her eyes were open, wide and unblinking, but they didn't hold the fear I expected. They were vacant, empty, as if the soul that once inhabited them had been ripped away in an instant. But something was different now. The shadows that had been so still moments before were moving, shifting. I could feel them swirling around me, pushing against my legs, tugging at my clothes, as if the house itself were alive. I heard the whispers again, softer now, but still insistent. Return, return, return. I tried to shake off the feeling, to push away the rising panic that clawed at my chest, but the terror had already taken hold. I was trapped. I pulled Emily into my arms, my heart racing as I checked for a pulse, but I knew it was pointless. She was gone. The shadows had claimed her, just as they had claimed this place. No, this isn't real, I muttered, my voice shaking. I tried to calm myself, to make sense of what had just happened, but there was nothing to explain it. The room was darkening around me, and the whispers were growing louder, more insistent, more demanding. You shouldn't have come back, a voice whispered behind me. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was no one there. I was alone in the room with Emily's body, the air heavy with the presence of something ancient and hungry. The floor creaked beneath me as I stood, my legs trembling, my mind a whirl of confusion and fear. But I couldn't just leave her here. I couldn't leave her in this hellish place, not after everything she had gone through to be here. And then I remembered the mask. The mask that had drawn me into this nightmare. It had to be connected. It had to be the key to understanding what was happening here. It was no coincidence that it had been in the chest that was hidden in the attic, the chest that called to me. And now it had to be part of the reason Emily was lying in front of me, cold, lifeless, consumed by whatever darkness this house held. I turned and stumbled back to the attic, my pulse racing in my ears as I struggled to make sense of everything. The house was too quiet now, the only sound being the rasp of my breath, the pounding of my heart. When I reached the attic, I barely even registered the pain in my legs from running up the stairs. I was moving on pure instinct, drawn to the place that had started all of this, the place where I had first found the mask. I pushed open the attic door, but something was different now. The shadows were deeper, the air was colder, and the whispers were louder. Return, return, return. The mask was still on the floor where I had dropped it earlier. It was the only thing that seemed unchanged, unscathed by the darkness that had swept through the house. I reached down and picked it up again, this time more cautiously, as though the mask itself might bite back. The moment my fingers brushed against the wood, a sharp pain shot through my hand. It was like 1,000 needles had pierced my skin. I hissed in pain and nearly dropped it again, but something inside me, a deep, primal urge, held me in place. I had to put it on. The thought was so foreign, so strange, that it didn't make sense. But it was there, like a whisper in my own head. It wasn't just the mask anymore, it was me. I was part of this place, part of the curse. I lifted the mask toward my face, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel it pulling at me, drawing me closer, as though it were a part of me all along. My hands trembled as I positioned it in front of my face. "Don't do it," a voice whispered. Emily's voice. But it wasn't her. It couldn't be. But I ignored it. With a sharp inhale, I pressed the mask to my face. The world around me shifted instantly. The room spun. The air became thick with the stench of decay, of rot, of something ancient that had been buried for centuries. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I could feel the mask fitting to my face like it had been made for me. But something wasn't right. The darkness seemed to pulse now, moving like a living thing beneath my skin. I gasped, trying to rip it off, but my hands wouldn't obey. It was like I was trapped inside my own body, unable to control it. I stumbled back, falling against the wall, my eyes wide with terror as the shadows around me seemed to press in even closer, suffocating me. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The darkness receded. The mask felt lighter, and the whispers, those terrible, haunting whispers, faded into silence. But this was worse. I felt like I was floating in a void. Like I was somewhere between life and death, between worlds. My eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of what was happening, but everything was wrong. The walls looked strange, warped, bending in ways that couldn't be real. The air felt thick and sticky, like I was trapped in a dream from which there was no escape. I heard the whispering again, but it wasn't in my head anymore. It was coming from somewhere else, somewhere close. I turned slowly, my heart racing, and my eyes locked onto the doorway. Standing in the doorway was the figure, the one I had seen before, the one that had followed me. It was closer now, almost within reach. It stepped forward, its form flickering in and out of existence, like it couldn't decide if it was real. Its hollow eyes stared at me, empty and cold, and I could feel its presence pushing against me, like it was trying to drag me into the shadows. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to see it. But I couldn't look away. I couldn't move. It spoke again, its voice like 1,000 voices layered on top of each other. Return to where you belong. I felt a tug on my chest, an irresistible pull that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. The mask burned against my face, and I could feel my body becoming heavier, like gravity itself was turning against me. I was going to fall. I was going to be dragged into the darkness, consumed by whatever this thing was. I couldn't stop it. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I couldn't. My limbs were paralyzed. I couldn't even take a breath. And then, just as the shadows were closing in around me, something strange happened. The figure stepped back, its presence receding. The weight on my chest lifted. The whispers stopped. For a moment, everything was still. But then, through the silence, came a voice. A soft, familiar voice. Ethan, it was Emily's voice. I whipped around, my heart nearly stopping in my chest. She was standing in the doorway. But it wasn't her. It couldn't be. Her eyes were empty, just like the figures. And the mask, still pressed against my face, pulled me toward her. Chapter 6. The Fractured Reality. I should have known. I should have recognized the warning signs. The moment I put the mask on, I sealed my fate. The moment those shadows had drawn closer, I was already lost. But I couldn't think clearly now. I was drowning in a sea of confusion, panic, and terror. I didn't know what was real anymore. Ethan. Her voice. Emily's voice. It was soft, almost tender, but there was an edge to it that made my stomach churn. I turned toward her, my heart hammering, every muscle in my body locked in fear. She was standing in the doorway, but it wasn't the same Emily I had known. The Emily who had walked through this cursed house with me, who had begged me to leave. Her eyes were empty, hollow. The light that had once been in them was gone, replaced with something darker. Something unnatural. Emily? I croaked, my voice breaking. But the version of her standing before me didn't answer. It didn't even move. It just stood there, staring at me with those lifeless eyes as though waiting for something. For what I couldn't say. I took a step forward, my legs shaking beneath me, my body moving against my will. I wasn't in control anymore. Something was pulling me, some force stronger than my own fear, my own will. Emily, please. I whispered, but she didn't respond. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room seemed to deepen. The walls bent and stretched in unnatural ways, distorting, warping like a bad reflection in a cracked mirror. The house felt like it was shifting around me, breathing, growing. It felt like the ground beneath my feet was slipping away, leaving me stranded in some nightmarish void. Return. Return. The whispering began again, softer this time, like it was coming from all directions at once. I couldn't tell if it was in my head or if it was coming from the house itself, but it was relentless. It dug into my skull, gnawing at my sanity, pulling me deeper into this web of darkness. I stumbled backward, clutching at my chest, gasping for air. My vision blurred, my breath came in ragged bursts. Don't listen to it. Emily's voice, if it was truly her, was now layered with an almost painful desperation. It sounded wrong, like she was struggling to break free from something. You have to leave. We have to leave. Now, before it takes you too. My head swam with confusion. What did she mean? Before what takes me? It was the same voice, but it wasn't the same person. Emily couldn't be this thing. This wasn't her. It couldn't be. Leave, she whispered again, but her voice was fading, like she was being dragged back into the shadows. And just like that, she was gone, vanished. I felt it too. The sudden emptiness, the hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't alone, though. I felt something else, a presence, something standing just behind me, breathing down my neck. You shouldn't have come back, the voice rasped from somewhere deep within the house, echoing in every corner, in every shadow. It was everywhere. It was in the walls, in the floorboards, in the very air I breathed. I spun around, my eyes wild, searching for the source of the voice, but the room was empty. There was no one here but me, and the suffocating weight of the curse that had settled over this place. The mask, it was still on my face. It felt like it had become a part of me, like it was inside my skin, pressing against my thoughts, wrapping around my very soul. And then I saw it. The floor beneath me, where Emily had been lying just moments ago, began to crack. The boards splintered, and from beneath them something began to rise. Something alive. The air was thick with the stench of decay, of rot. My stomach churned, and my pulse quickened. The shadows seemed to be crawling up the walls, reaching for the cracks in the floorboards, reaching for the thing that was emerging. I tried to move, to escape, but my legs wouldn't obey. It was like I was glued to the spot, unable to run, unable to scream. All I could do was watch. The thing that emerged from the floor was like nothing I had ever seen. It was a mass of writhing black tendrils, twisting and slithering as though it were some kind of monstrous parasite. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the face. It was Emily's face, or what had once been Emily's face. It was distorted, stretched like it had been pulled from the depths of some hellish nightmare. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, but they were empty. Nothing more than dark, hollow sockets. Her mouth was stretched open in an eternal scream, but no sound came out, just the silence, the suffocating, overwhelming silence. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My hands were trembling, my fingers numbing as I reached up to pull the mask from my face, but it wouldn't come off. I panicked. I tugged at the mask, my fingers scraping against it, but it felt like it was glued to my skin. My head was spinning, the room was spinning. The shadows were closing in, swirling around me, pressing down on me. Return. The voice whispered again, growing louder, more insistent. It was coming from everywhere. Return to the past. The ground beneath me began to shake, the walls groaning with the weight of something ancient, something alive. The air was thick with the stench of death, of decay, and something worse. Something that felt like it was feeding on me, draining the very life from my body. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was being swallowed by the house, by the curse, by the mask, and then a loud crash. The house, it was breaking apart. Something was shattering, something that had been holding it all together, and I was caught in the middle of it. The mask would not come off. The shadows would not retreat. The floor began to collapse beneath me, and I screamed, reaching for the walls, for anything to hold on to. But there was nothing. The darkness was closing in, and there was no escape. Chapter 7. I can't breathe. I can't think. The house, it's alive. Every second feels like an eternity as the darkness presses in around me, suffocating, twisting, bending the walls, the air, reality itself. I reach out, trying to steady myself, but the ground beneath me is unstable, shifting as though it has a will of its own, pulling me down, drawing me closer to something horrible. Something ancient, something I can't outrun. The mask, the cursed thing that has bound me to this place, clings to my face like a second skin, refusing to let go. I rip at it, my hands raw with the effort, but it's no use. It's as if the mask has fused with me. I can feel its presence deep within me, rooting itself in my thoughts, in my soul, dragging me toward an inescapable fate. I can't escape. Return. The voice whispers again, so close, so impossibly close. It's the house speaking to me, its ancient voice rising from the walls, the very ground beneath me. The floor trembles, and I stumble, falling to my knees, trying desperately to catch my breath. Ethan. The voice is familiar, but distorted. Emily's voice, but twisted, stretched thin like a scream that's been held too long. You shouldn't have come back. You should have stayed away. I don't know what's real anymore. I push myself up, gasping for air, my body shaking with fear. My thoughts are a jumbled mess, the whispers growing louder, faster, becoming a maddening chorus in my ears. I can hear footsteps, heavy, dragging footsteps, coming from somewhere in the darkness. The walls pulse with a sickening rhythm, as though the house itself is breathing, alive and aware. I turn, panic rising in my chest, but I can't see anything. The shadows have swallowed the room. The air is thick, suffocating. The oppressive weight of it presses against my chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. Ethan, the voice again. It's Emily's, but it doesn't sound like her anymore. It sounds like something else. I know what it is. I know what this place is. It's not just a house, it's a trap. A prison built on a cursed land. A place where time doesn't flow as it should, where the dead never leave. Where the past is always alive, always watching. The house itself is feeding on us, on me, and every second I remain here, the more it tightens its grip. I can feel it. The walls seem to breathe in time with me, and the floor beneath my feet shifts like quicksand, like I'm standing on the edge of a black void. The mask. The mask is the key to everything. And yet, I can't understand it. I can't escape it. You're not alone, Ethan. The voice is closer now, right behind me. I can feel the breath on the back of my neck, cold, clammy, like death itself. I whip around, but there's nothing there. Just darkness. The kind of darkness that reaches, it doesn't just fill the space, it grabs at you, claws at your skin, pulls you in, and then something grabs my wrist. Cold. So cold it burns. I gasp and spin, but I don't need to see it. I already know what's holding me. It's Emily. Her hands are ice. Her fingers dig into my flesh with unnatural strength, her grip unyielding. Her body is not solid. It's like she's made of mist, of shadows. Her face is an impossible distortion, her eyes wide and vacant, her mouth stretched open in a silent scream. She's pulling me in, dragging me toward the ground, toward the endless abyss beneath us. I try to scream, to break free, but my voice dies in my throat. My body is numb, paralyzed by fear, by the overwhelming presence of whatever it is that has claimed her, and now me. No, please, I plead, my voice barely a whisper. But Emily doesn't respond. Her face, her corpse's face, twists in ways that make my stomach turn. Her eyes flicker in and out of focus, now something more inhuman than human, something wrong. And then the walls around us crack. The house groans in pain, like it's alive. The air smells like burning, like something ancient and forgotten has just woken up. You don't belong here. Emily's voice hisses, her breath ragged and strained. You never should have come back. You're one of us now. You've been marked. Marked. That word. Marked. The house has marked me. I fight to breathe, to think, but the weight of the curse presses in, pulling me deeper into its web. The shadows around me grow darker, colder. They stretch and writhe like serpents, and I can feel them closing in. I feel their eyes on me, their presence, watching. I can hear it now, a low hum like a distant chant growing louder. The whispers, they're not just in my head, they're coming from everywhere, from the walls, from the floor, from the shadows themselves. Return to where you belong, it chants over and over, its voice rising in intensity. Return to the darkness, return to the past, we are waiting for you. The room is spinning, my vision blurs. The mask burns against my face, its presence seeping into my skin, into my mind. I can feel it, the pull, the suction of the past, of the curse, dragging me into the earth, into the heart of the house. And then I hear it. A crack, a split. The house is breaking apart, the walls collapse, the floor splinters, and everything is descending into chaos. The air is thick with the sound of something ancient awakening, something hungry. Ethan. It's Emily again. But this time, it's not a warning. It's not a plea. It's a command. Come, join us. I scream. Loud, desperate, but it's drowned out by the crashing of the house, the roars of something monstrous, something ancient. I'm being consumed. The darkness is swallowing me, dragging me down into the depths, into the blackness, into the place where I no longer exist. Chapter 8. The world doesn't make sense anymore. The shadows are everywhere. They stretch across the room like fingers, curling around the walls, seeping into every corner, every crack. The house is alive, alive in ways I can't understand, in ways I don't want to. The mask, it's still there, suffocating me, pressing into my skin, binding me to something far worse than I could have ever imagined. I stagger through the hallway, my steps faltering, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps. The air is thick with the stench of decay, of death. The walls pulse around me, the floors creak as if something beneath them is stirring, awakening. There's a constant hum in the air, like the house itself is whispering, like it's calling to something. Something ancient, something hungry. I try to push the thought away, I try to concentrate, but everything is so wrong. My head is spinning, the floor shifts beneath me, and I almost lose my balance, but I catch myself on the wall, my fingers slipping over the cold, damp surface. The wallpaper is peeling, hanging in tatters like some decaying skin. I have to get out. I have to. But where do I go? The hall stretches before me, an endless corridor of darkness. There's no end. There's no escape. Every door I open leads to the same thing, a room that feels like it's been here forever, a room that warps and twists with every passing moment. I hear a noise behind me, a soft shuffling, a dragging sound, like something dragging its body across the floor. I freeze. my heart leaping into my throat. I turn slowly, too slowly, afraid of what I might see. The air grows colder, like the temperature has dropped by 10 degrees in an instant. My breath fogs in front of me, and the shadows grow deeper, more suffocating. And then I see it. The figure. It's standing at the far end of the hallway, just at the edge of the light, barely visible through the haze of shadow, but I know who it is. I know it's Emily. No. No, it's not. It's not Emily anymore. Her body is twisted, hunched, and distorted in ways that are impossible. Her face is stretched like someone's taken it and pulled it far too tight, the skin contorting in unnatural ways. Her eyes are wide and empty, black as pitch, and her mouth is open, but no sound comes from it. It's the same twisted scream from before, but now it's silent, as though she's trapped in her own nightmare. I back up, my legs trembling beneath me. My heart races, panic floods my veins. The room feels like it's closing in on me, pressing in on all sides. The shadows are alive, and they're coming closer. I feel them wrap around my legs, my arms, trying to pull me down. Ethan? The voice? It's Emily's voice again, but it's hollow, empty. It echoes in my mind. You should have listened. Now you're one of us. You belong to the house. You'll never leave. I try to run, but my body won't move. My feet feel like they're glued to the floor, weighed down by the darkness. The figure of Emily, if it even is her, begins to move, dragging itself toward me, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. The walls groan as if they're alive, creaking and cracking under the pressure of something huge, something ancient, something that doesn't want me to escape. The house is closing in, and there's nowhere to hide. I scream, but it's lost in the emptiness. No one will hear me. There's no one left. I've been here too long. I've been marked. Ethan. The voice again. It's closer now, right next to me, a whisper that sends a cold shiver down my spine. You've already crossed the threshold. There's no going back. You belong to the house now. The house. The words reverberate in my skull like they're etched in the very fabric of my mind. I can't escape. I'm trapped. The house is pulling me in, and I can feel it. I can feel the walls tightening, the darkness wrapping around me like a vice, crushing the air from my lungs. I claw at my chest, desperate to breathe, but the weight of it is unbearable. No, I whisper, my voice breaking. I won't be like you. I won't become part of this place. But the shadows laugh, a deep guttural sound that echoes all around me. It's not a laugh, it's a hunger, a thirst, a call to the void. And then the walls crack open. A blinding light bursts through the cracks in the floor, from the ceiling, from the very walls. It's the light of something ancient, something that's been buried here for centuries, something that was waiting for me, for anyone foolish enough to step inside. I try to scream, but the light consumes me. It's too bright, too hot. My skin feels like it's burning, like I'm being pulled into a furnace, the light shredding me from the inside out. I fight, kicking and screaming, but the light won't let me go. You belong to us. The voice isn't just Emily's anymore. It's the house. It's the land. It's everything that has ever lived here, everything that has been trapped here. And now, it's taking me. I fall to my knees, my vision fading. The light blurs, becoming a mass of white-hot fury. The heat is unbearable, and the sound of the house, of the spirits of whatever force is here, drowns out everything. And then, just as quickly as it began, the light is gone. I'm left in the darkness, alone. But not really. The shadows are still there. They linger. I can feel their eyes on me. The silence presses in, suffocating as I try to stand, my body trembling. My hands shake as I reach for the walls, my fingers brushing the crumbling plaster, and I realize I'm not alone. Something is watching me from the dark. Something that wasn't there before. Something new. Chapter 9. The Descent. I'm starting to forget what it feels like to be human. I don't know how long I've been walking. Time is meaningless here, just a blur of darkness, fleeting moments of light, and that hum that never stops. The house has become my prison, its walls closing in on me like a vice. But it's not just the walls, it's the air, the silence. It wraps itself around me, tightening with every breath I take, making it harder to think, harder to remember who I am, where I came from. It's suffocating. I try to focus. I try to remember what I'm doing, where I'm going, but the memories slip away from me, like sand running through my fingers. Every time I think I have a hold of them, they dissolve into nothing. My thoughts are foggy, disjointed. Every step feels like it's dragging me deeper into some unseen force, like I'm being led to an inevitable end, a place I can't escape. I reach for the walls, my fingers brushing the cold, damp plaster, but they're slick, like something alive, something that moves beneath my touch. The walls themselves are shifting, warping, like they're breathing. The hum in the air grows louder, like 1,000 whispers scraping against my mind. It's maddening. It's unbearable. Ethan, the voice again. It's familiar, but wrong. So wrong. Come to us. It echoes, a chorus of whispers that seem to come from every direction. My skin crawls. It feels like the house itself is speaking, pulling at my soul, gnawing at my thoughts. I stagger forward, my legs weak beneath me. I can barely see. The light from before, is gone. The house is plunging me back into the suffocating darkness. I can't tell if my eyes are open anymore. It feels like I've been blind for days. Weeks? Or maybe I was never meant to see in this place. There's something wrong with me. I press my hand to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. I don't know if it's the house or the mask or something inside me, but something's changing. I can feel it. I can feel myself slipping away. I'm losing myself, my identity, my sense of reality. And the worst part, I'm starting to welcome it. There's a crack, and I jerk my head up. I hear the sound of footsteps, slow, dragging footsteps coming toward me. It's like they're on top of me, right behind me, yet when I turn around, there's no one there. But I feel them. They're coming. I stumble forward, heart racing. My hands are trembling, my body covered in cold sweat. I don't know where I'm going anymore. I don't know why I'm still moving. I can feel my mind unspooling, each thread of sanity slipping further and further away. It's the house. It's the thing inside it. It's pulling me apart, piece by piece, breaking down every part of me, every part of who I was. I open a door. The room is dark, suffocating. There's no escape. There never was. I've been running in circles, caught in the same trap. And the worst part, I can't remember why I came here in the first place. I don't even remember why I'm fighting. The door slams shut behind me. I turn to face the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The room is familiar. It's the same one from earlier, the one with the broken windows, the peeling wallpaper, but now it's different. The air is thick with an unnatural chill, and there's something on the floor, something alive. I step closer. It's a body, a woman's body. My breath catches in my throat as I take in the shape on the floor. The hair is matted with blood, the face twisted, contorted, barely recognizable. But there's something about it, something that makes my heart skip a beat. It's her. It's Emily. I fall to my knees, my hands trembling as I reach out for her. The cold from her skin freezes me to the bone as I touch her face. I can feel her. I can feel her presence, a hollow emptiness that chills me to my core. But her eyes are open, staring at me, vacant. Dead. Or is she? I pull away in horror, gasping for air. The house is shaking now, vibrating beneath me like it's alive, like it's growing angry. The hum in the air is deafening, and the whispers are back. Louder now, impossibly loud. I can hear them in my skull, scraping at my thoughts, pulling at the edges of my sanity. You can't leave. The whispers chant. You belong to us. I can't breathe. I can't think. I try to stand, but the walls seem to be closing in, the floor beneath me buckling like it's made of paper. And then something grabs me. Cold hands. So cold it feels like ice is pouring through my veins. The fingers dig into my flesh, pulling me down, dragging me toward the floor, toward the body of Emily. Come back to us. Her voice rings out again. It's her, but not her. It's like a ghost, a shadow, a thing that wears her skin. The house is playing tricks on me. It's playing with me. I try to scream, but nothing comes out. My chest is tight. My throat is closing. The darkness is pulling me in, and I can't fight it anymore. The air is thick with whispers. The house is suffocating me. The walls are alive, pressing in on me, and I can feel something ancient, something evil moving in the dark. Something with eyes. Something that has been waiting for me. You shouldn't have come back. The voice is Emily's, but it's not her. It's them. The house, the force that lives inside it, the curse. Now you're one of us. I can feel it. I can feel myself slipping away. The world around me is fading. The edges of my vision blur, and I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality. My mind is unraveling. I can't think anymore. The house has consumed me, and I've become a part of it. And there's no way out. I'm trapped. Chapter 10. The house is still whispering. I don't know how long I've been here. It could be hours. It could be days. Time has become a cruel joke. There's no more sense of day or night. There's just the hum, the constant hum, and the suffocating weight of the air pressing in on me, wrapping around me like a straitjacket. The walls are alive, pulsing and breathing, as if they were waiting for something. Waiting for me. The whispers are louder now, but they're not just in my ears. They're inside me. They scrape against my thoughts like fingernails on a chalkboard. They pull at the edges of my mind, tearing at whatever scraps of sanity I have left. I can feel the house inside my skull, crawling through my veins. It's like it's merging with me, becoming part of me, until I can't tell where it ends and I begin. I stagger down another hallway, my steps slow, deliberate. The darkness presses in on me from all sides, suffocating. I feel like I'm walking through some twisted dream where the laws of reality have stopped making sense. The walls shift and sway, their angles impossible. The floor cracks beneath my feet and the ceiling feels like it's about to collapse on me at any second. I'm not sure why I'm still moving. Maybe I'm searching for a way out, or maybe I'm just hoping for an end. A final, sweet release from the madness that has consumed me. The shadows move, flickering at the edge of my vision. I don't need to look. I already know what they are. They're him. The man I saw earlier, the one with the eyes that were empty, hollow, like he'd been dead for 1,000 years. His face is burned into my memory, his mouth twisted into a grin that sends shivers down my spine. He's here, somewhere in the dark, watching me. I hear his footsteps now, slow, deliberate. They echo through the halls like a death march. I freeze, my heart thudding in my chest. I can feel him getting closer, the temperature in the air dropping with every passing second. I want to run. I need to run, but my legs won't move. It's like something is holding me in place, like the house itself has gripped me. Ethan? The voice calls out to me, deep and gravelly, like it's been scratched from the throat of something ancient. Something dead. I don't respond. I can't. Every instinct in my body is screaming for me to run, to hide, to get away from this thing. But where would I go? What would I do? I'm already lost in the labyrinth of the house, and I'm not sure I even want to leave anymore. You think you're the first? The voice again, closer now, so close I can feel it in my bones. You think you can leave? There's no leaving, Ethan. There's no escape. This is your home now. You're forever. The floor beneath me shifts, and I nearly lose my balance. I can hear it now. The low rumble, the sound of something moving under the house. It's not just the walls anymore. The entire foundation is shaking, like the house is breathing, shifting, alive, and then there's a sound. A sound I can't ignore, a scream. It's coming from somewhere deep inside the house. It's distant, but it's real. It's someone in agony, someone in pain. I know that scream. It's Emily's. I whirl around, desperate to find the source of the sound. My eyes dart from side to side, but there's nothing, only the suffocating darkness. The hallway stretches on endlessly, like a void that has no beginning or end. Help me. Emily's voice whispers from the shadows, barely audible. I stumble forward, drawn by the sound. I don't know if it's real. I don't know if it's her. But I can't stop myself. I need to find her. I need to save her. I push open a door, and the room is cold, colder than I've ever felt before. The air is thick with rot, with something that smells like death. My eyes struggle to adjust to the dim light. But when they do, I see her. Emily. But she's not how I remember her. Her body is lying on the floor, but her eyes, they're wide open, staring at me with an emptiness that makes my heart stop. Her skin is pale, stretched tight across her bones, and her hair is matted with blood. But it's not the blood that terrifies me. It's her smile. It's too wide, too wrong. Her mouth opens, and I hear the words whispered through the cracked, jagged teeth that shouldn't be there. Shh, you shouldn't have come. Her voice is hollow, a guttural sound that sends a chill down my spine. I back away, stumbling over my own feet. My mind is racing. This can't be real. It can't be. But the house is pulling me in, twisting everything I thought I knew. It's distorting my memories, my thoughts. It's making me see what it wants me to see. And it's using Emily to do it. I turn and run. I have to get away from her. From it. But the hallways are closing in on me. The walls are too tight. The air is too thick. The house is pressing in on me, squeezing me until I can't breathe. Ethan, the voice is back, low and mocking. Why do you fight? Why do you resist? You belong to us now. You're already dead. I reach for the door at the end of the hallway, but it won't open. It's like it's glued shut. I pound on it with my fists, but it won't budge. The whispers grow louder, filling my mind, drowning me in their maddening chant. And then I feel it. A hand on my shoulder. Cold fingers. I turn around, but there's no one there. The door behind me creaks open, slowly, its hinges groaning like a corpse waking from its grave. I step forward cautiously, not sure if I want to know what's on the other side, but I have no choice. I'm trapped. I step into the next room, and it's like nothing I've ever seen before. The walls are lined with mirrors, but they're not just mirrors, they're windows. Windows into another world. A world where I am dead. I can see it. I can see myself, but it's not me. The reflection is twisted. My eyes are black, my skin decayed, I'm rotting in the glass, my mouth hanging open in a silent scream, and behind me in the mirror is the thing that has been chasing me. The house. It's in the reflection. It's standing there, watching me, its mouth stretched into a smile that isn't a smile. It's a hunger. And I realize in that moment that I've never been alone. I've never been alive. I've always been part of the house. In this chapter, Ethan's reality crumbles completely. The house's grip on him is absolute, and he begins to face the horrifying truth. He was never meant to escape. He was always part of the darkness, always one of the dead the house has claimed. Chapter 11. The Hidden Ritual. I didn't want to believe it at first. That's the truth. I couldn't bring myself to accept what my eyes were showing me. It's too monstrous, too impossible. The house, with its ever-shifting walls and suffocating silence, the way it twists everything it touches, I thought I could escape. I thought if I just kept moving, kept fighting, I could break free. But this place doesn't let you fight. It doesn't let you think you have control. It takes everything from you, piece by piece, until you're nothing but a puppet with no strings, only the faintest whispers of your former self left. I found something. I didn't mean to, but I did. It was hidden in a room I'd never seen before, behind a door that wasn't there until I stumbled across it. It was in the farthest corner of the house where the air felt different, heavy, like it was pressed in by something greater, something ancient. It was the kind of place you know shouldn't be found, but there I was, standing in front of it, the door creaking open as if it had been waiting for me. Inside there was an altar. At least that's what it looked like, a large stone slab worn smooth with age, standing in the center of the room. The walls were lined with symbols, carved deep into the stone and the wood, running in spirals like a web. The same feeling of dread that had gripped me when I first entered the house slammed into me again. There was an old book on the altar. It was leather-bound, its pages yellowed and brittle, as if it had been written centuries ago, its ink faded but still legible. And the name on the cover. My blood went cold. The Ritual of Eternity. I don't know why I opened it. Something inside me told me to stay away, but my hands wouldn't listen. I had to know. I had to. The words on the first page were a series of incantations. They weren't in any language I recognized, but I could feel the power in them, radiating from the page like a living thing. And as I turned each page, it became clearer. This house, this thing, it's not just haunted, it's not just cursed, it's alive, bound to something far darker than I could ever imagine. And the grandmother, she, is the one who summoned it. Her name is written there alongside the ritual. I don't know how long I stood there, reading, my heart pounding in my chest, but it felt like hours. The ritual was designed to bind a soul to the house, to give it power, to grant immortality. But it came with a price. Always a price. The ritual requires 2 sacrifices, 2 pure souls, and their bodies, minds, and souls are claimed by the house itself. I think I stopped breathing when I realized the full truth. The spell, the ritual, it wasn't just some ancient forgotten lore. It was happening. Right here, right now. And Emily was one of the sacrifices. But I was the second. I looked back at the door. There was something different about it now. It wasn't just the room that felt strange. It was the whole house. There was an energy, a pulsing force that seemed to draw me deeper into its grip, urging me forward, pulling me into its core. My feet moved of their own accord, carrying me back down the hallway, the walls shifting again, pressing in on me. But the house didn't feel like it was just controlling me anymore. No, it felt like it was becoming me. I felt a tug, a pull in my chest, like the house had found a way to reach inside me, to wrap its cold, bony fingers around my very soul. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't even remember why I wanted to anymore. I turned down another corridor, the darkness growing heavier with each step, but it wasn't just darkness. There was something ahead. I knew it. And then I saw her. Grandmother Seraphina. She was standing in the center of the room, a black robe draped over her frail body, her long, gray hair falling like a curtain over her face. Her eyes were closed, but I could feel her staring at me, seeing through me. Her presence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating, like the very air was bending to her will. Behind her, Emily stood, lifeless, her head slightly tilted, her expression blank. Her eyes, they were gone, not in the way of death, but in the way of something, empty, hollow. And the worst part? I didn't feel the shock I should have. I just felt numb. The grandmother opened her eyes. The moment they met mine, I could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on me. She smiled, a smile that had no warmth in it, no humanity. "You've come to understand, haven't you?" she croaked, her voice raspy with age, yet it carried an unnatural resonance that vibrated in my bones. I wanted to say something, to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. "Emily was chosen first," she continued, her voice lilting as though she were speaking to a child. "She was perfect, pure. She's the one who will carry the power, and you," she paused, her eyes narrowing, "you are the final piece. The last sacrifice." I tried to speak. I wanted to ask why, how, but nothing came out. "You're a part of this now," Seraphina said, stepping closer to me. The house has claimed you. You are bound to it, and so is she." She nodded at Emily. I could feel it now. The pull, the force tightening. This wasn't just a house. It wasn't just a curse. It was a trap, a prison. She stepped forward and placed her hand on Emily's forehead. "This one," she murmured. "That her body will serve me now. Her soul will be mine." My stomach twisted and a scream broke through my throat, but it was so quiet, so feeble. "And you," Seraphina said, turning back to me with a cold smile. "You'll become the mask. You'll wear it for eternity. The house will take you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left of you but your essence. And when Emily becomes me..." Her voice trailed off, but I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew what she meant. Emily was becoming her, taking her place. And I would become something worse than dead. I would become part of the house, the mask. The spell had already begun. The house was closing in on me. It was taking me. Chapter 12. The air felt thicker now, more oppressive than before. The house seemed to hum, a low, menacing vibration that made my teeth ache. And every step I took felt as if I were walking through molasses. The weight of it, the curse, the magic, pressed against me, squeezing my ribs until I could barely breathe. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, to tear myself from this nightmare that had trapped me. But there was no escaping it. I was already caught. Emily, she was standing there, her eyes hollow, like she wasn't even aware of me. Her body was so still, it was as though she had been carved from stone. The faintest tremor ran through her, but it wasn't her own. It was the house, Seraphina's will, working its way into her, forcing her to submit. I could feel it, this dark energy wrapping around her, sinking into her skin. It was a quiet, almost delicate process, but it was happening, bit by bit. It was as if her body was a vessel, slowly being claimed by something far older, far darker than she or I could comprehend. I couldn't look away. "It's already started," Seraphina murmured, her voice a rasping whisper in my ear. I hadn't even realized she had moved. Her breath was hot against my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. "You can feel it, can't you? Her soul is fading, becoming part of me. It's only a matter of time before she's no longer Emily. She'll be me. And you." Her voice turned colder, sharper. "You will wear her body. You will be her." I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest. The words felt like a dagger twisting inside me. The weight of them, of her, crushed me. I had no idea how to escape this. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. The house, the walls, the very air around me was growing thicker, as if it was alive, breathing, pulsating. It was feeding off my fear, feeding off our fear. I could feel its hunger, like it was waiting for something, like it was savoring the moment before the final act. But I couldn't move. I could barely think. Why Emily? I croaked, my voice hoarse and weak. I barely recognized it as my own. Why her? Why not me? Seraphina's laugh was soft, but it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was a laugh of triumph. Because she is pure. She is untouched. You... She turned away from me and waved a hand toward the altar. You are already marked. The house has claimed you. You will become the mask, the vessel of its will. You'll serve it, just as you will serve me, and when she is mine, you will be trapped here, trapped inside the attic, your body nothing but a mask for eternity. I wanted to scream, to fight, but my limbs felt heavy, sluggish. The house, the ritual, had already taken hold of me, had begun the transformation. My thoughts were cloudy, slipping through my fingers like water. And Emily wasn't even here anymore. Her body was still standing, her eyes empty, but I could feel her slipping away. The magic was slowly suffocating her, binding her to the house, to Seraphina. I had no idea how long she had been like this, how much of her had already been taken, but I knew it wasn't going to stop. The ritual was moving forward, whether we were ready or not. Seraphina turned back to me, her expression cold, calculating. There's still time for you, Ethan. She stepped closer, her thin, bony hand reaching out, brushing against my cheek. Still time to accept your fate. I couldn't answer. My mind was a haze of fear and confusion, the weight of her presence crushing me. The house, it was pulling at me. Every breath I took felt like it was filling my lungs with something foul, something alive. The air tasted like death. Emily will be mine in just a few hours, Seraphina continued, her voice laced with excitement. Then we will begin the final part of the ritual, the one where you become the mask. Your body, your soul, they will be merged with the house forever. You'll be trapped in the attic, a hollow vessel to carry the house's power. Emily will be my vessel. She will serve me, and you will serve her. I backed away from her, my head spinning. It felt like the house was closing in, the walls pushing in on me, the floor shifting beneath my feet. It wasn't just the house, it was Seraphina, and it was Emily. The weight of what she was saying hit me with brutal clarity. The attic, that was where it all ended. I had heard the whispers, I had felt the presence. The attic wasn't just a room, it was a prison, a cage. It was where the final transformation would take place. And once it did, once I was in the attic, I would never leave. I would never escape. The house would take me. The house would claim me. I was already dying, but I didn't know how to stop it. I turned back to Emily. Her form was so still. The shadows in the room seemed to wrap around her, curling like tendrils of smoke. I couldn't tell if she was still breathing, if she was still there at all. There was no life in her eyes, no spark of recognition when I called her name. And that was when I saw it. A flicker. A movement. Her fingers twitched. It was so subtle, so small, but it was there. Her lips parted slightly as though she was trying to speak. But the sound that came from her mouth was not hers. It wasn't even human. It was a low, guttural rasp, like something ancient, something trapped inside her, clawing to get out. Help me. The words came again, but they weren't Emily's. They were something else. Seraphina's voice, pushing through her body like a parasite, wrapping itself around Emily's soul. Emily was slipping. She was being erased. Her very essence was being torn apart, consumed by Seraphina's dark power. I reached out to her, but my hand trembled. I could feel the house pulling me back. It didn't want me to help her. It wanted me to watch, to witness the final stage of the ritual. And then the worst part came. Her eyes opened, slowly, painfully, but they weren't Emily's anymore. They were Seraphina's. I felt the earth shift beneath my feet. I was already too late. Chapter 13. The Hollowing. I couldn't breathe. The sound of Emily's voice, or what was left of it, still echoed in my mind, a twisted, guttural rasp that shouldn't have come from someone I loved. It should have been impossible. It shouldn't have been her. But it was, and the worst part, I had known all along. From the first night we walked into this damned house, I had known that something wasn't right. The air had been wrong. The house had whispered to us, beckoning us, but I hadn't understood what it wanted, what it was going to do. The grandmother, the rituals, the ancient magic, it had all been here, waiting, planning. Emily's eyes, those eyes still haunted me. They were open now, wide and empty, no recognition in them at all, just the dark void that had taken over her face. That wasn't my sister. It wasn't Emily. It was Seraphina. Her lips twitched into something like a smile, but it wasn't a smile that belonged on a human face. It was jagged, cruel, stretching far too wide, revealing teeth that were not her teeth. It was as if the face was only a mask, a fragile shell barely holding the monstrosity inside. "You see, Ethan?" Seraphina's voice rang out through Emily's lips, smooth and silken, but carrying an unnatural authority. "There's nothing left of her. She's gone. I have taken her. And now, we begin the next phase." I staggered back, my head spinning as I fought to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Emily couldn't be gone. I had to help her. I had to stop this. But the house was suffocating me. It was all around me, inside me, pulling me in, trying to drag me deeper into its heart, to the attic, to whatever unspeakable fate awaited. "You're not going to save her," Seraphina continued, her voice a sing-song mockery of Emily's gentle tones. "She's mine now. Her soul, it belongs to me. You were always the sacrifice, Ethan. I was just waiting for the right moment. The house was patient, but now it's time for you to accept what you are." My chest tightened and my thoughts swirled into chaos. She was in there. Emily was still somewhere inside, buried under the weight of Seraphina's dark power. I could feel it. I had to believe that she was still in there, that there was something I could do to stop this madness before it was too late. But what could I do? There was no escape. The house had already sealed us in, its influence creeping into every corner, every shadow. It was getting stronger, pulling tighter. The walls groaned as if the house itself was alive, aching with hunger, and I was its next meal. I reached out toward Emily, or the thing that used to be her, my hand trembling in the thick air, but before I could touch her, Seraphina's new face, Emily's face, jerked away from me. "You can't touch her," Seraphina hissed, her voice low and sharp like a blade slicing through my skull. "She's mine, and you." She paused, staring at me with those hollow eyes, my eyes, now twisted with the ancient power she had stolen. "You will be the vessel. You will become part of me. You will be part of the house." The force of her words felt like a physical blow. The air around me thickened, grew heavier. I tried to take a step back, but the floor seemed to shift beneath me. I couldn't balance myself, couldn't escape the crushing weight of Seraphina's presence. And then the attic door opened. I didn't hear it, I didn't see it, I just felt it. There was a low creak, a whisper in the dark, and when I looked up, the door to the attic was wide open. It was waiting for me. A sense of utter, paralyzing terror flooded my body. The attic. The place I had heard whispers about. The place I had seen in the shadows. It had always been there. Always looming. But now it was calling to me. The house wanted me there. The house needed me there. I couldn't stop my legs from moving. I didn't want to move, didn't want to walk toward that damn door, but my body wasn't listening. The house was in control. The house was taking me. "No." I whispered, barely able to form the word. I struggled to regain control of my own body, but it was slipping. Every part of me was slipping away, sinking into the very bones of the house. The walls were closing in, the shadows thickening, twisting in on themselves like serpents. Seraphina, still using Emily's voice, stepped toward me, her hand outstretched. "Come to me, Ethan. Come to the attic. You are already marked. You are already bound to me." I stumbled forward, unable to fight the pull. It was too strong. The air felt cold now, sharp and biting. I looked back at Emily, at her body standing there, still and lifeless. Was she still in there? The softest whisper reached my ears. It was faint, fragile, like a distant echo from the bottom of a well. "Ethan, please, help me." I didn't know if it was real, if it was just the house playing tricks on my mind. But it didn't matter. It was already too late. I was already walking toward the attic. The door loomed larger with every step I took, the darkness beyond swallowing all the light. The air grew thicker, the pulse of the house quicker, like a beating heart driving me toward the inevitable. And then, just as my hand reached the doorknob, just as I felt the ancient power wrap around my wrist and yank me inside, Emily's voice broke through the air. "Ethan, no!" It wasn't Seraphina anymore. It wasn't twisted or broken. It was her. It was Emily. And then everything went dark. Chapter 14, the final binding. The darkness closed around me, suffocating and thick like velvet, pressing in from all sides. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The air was heavy with the stench of old wood and something foul, something alive in the walls. My skin felt like it was crawling with unseen things, and no matter how much I tried to shake them off, they only grew stronger. I was inside the attic. I had crossed the threshold without realizing it. One moment my hand had grasped the doorknob, and the next I was standing here, at the heart of this cursed house, surrounded by shadows and the soft, menacing hum of something ancient and hungry. There was no going back. The door behind me slammed shut with a deafening crack, and I spun around, my heart thundering in my chest. But it was too late. I was already inside, and the house had me. And then I heard it. The sound. The sound I had been dreading ever since I first felt the presence in this place. The whisper. It started as a low murmur, like voices carried on the wind, but as I strained to listen, it became clear that it was not just one voice. It was 1,000 voices, layered on top of each other, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Their words twisted and melded together, creating a cacophony of agony, desire, and power. And in the center of it all, I felt her. Seraphina. I didn't even need to see her to know she was there. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the attic seemed to move of their own accord, shifting and coiling like a living thing. The walls, once old and decayed, seemed to pulse with life. Thick veins of blackness running through the wood. I stumbled forward, trying to fight the force that was dragging me deeper into the room, but my legs were heavy, as though the very floor had become a pit, sucking me down into the earth. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, and my vision blurred with the weight of the magic pressing in on me. "Welcome, Ethan." The voice was low, velvet soft, but it cut through the air with the sharpness of a blade. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. I could feel her power radiating out from the very walls of the house. I had to stop this. I had to break free. I took a step back, but the ground beneath me seemed to shift. The shadows writhed, wrapping around my ankles like 1,000 cold fingers. I couldn't move. My body refused to listen. "It's too late," Seraphina's voice purred, growing louder, more insistent. "You're already mine, Ethan. I've already taken your soul. You've been marked since the moment you entered this house." The words felt like ice against my skin. My mind raced, trying to piece together how this had all gone so horribly wrong. I had been a fool to think I could save Emily, to think I could escape the house. But Emily, I couldn't forget about Emily. I forced myself to focus, to find her. "Emily," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Emily, please, don't let her take you. Fight back!" The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, thought I had heard nothing at all. And then, like a candle being extinguished, I felt the slightest flicker of her. A pulse, a heartbeat. But it wasn't enough. The flicker of Emily's presence was barely a whisper, swallowed whole by the dark forces that enveloped her. The shadows in the room shifted again, and I turned, too late. Seraphina was standing before me, a dark figure silhouetted against the cold, dim light from the cracked ceiling. She was no longer hidden in the shadows. She stood tall, regal, with Emily's face still trapped in her grasp. But this wasn't Emily, not anymore. Emily's body had become an empty shell, a vessel. Seraphina's hands were stretched wide, her fingers long and thin like the limbs of a spider. Her skin shimmered in the dim light, the blackness of the room bending to her will. I could see the dark veins running beneath her skin, glowing faintly, pulsing with unnatural energy. "You thought you could save her," Seraphina murmured, her voice soft and mocking. "You thought you could stop me, but Emily was always mine, her soul, her essence. She was just waiting for the right moment to submit, and now..." She raised her hand, and the air thickened with power. "Now she is me. And you will serve me, Ethan. You'll wear her body, carry her power. You will be my mask. Forever." "No," I shouted, a surge of desperation rising in my chest. "You're lying! She's in there! I can feel her!" But Seraphina only laughed, a cruel, hollow laugh that echoed through the room like a bell tolling for the dead. "Emily is gone," she whispered. "She is mine, and you will be nothing but a vessel for what is to come." And then the floor beneath me shifted. The shadows grew more intense, swirling and pulling me into the center of the attic like I was being sucked into the heart of the house. The walls began to close in, the air thick and suffocating with power. My vision blurred, my legs buckling beneath me as the weight of the house bore down. I could feel it. The magic. The curse, it was pulling me in, wrapping around my throat, my chest, my limbs. It was like drowning, but without the sweet release of death. No, please, I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. Emily, help me. But the answer came in the form of another laugh. Seraphina's voice, but not her voice. The voice of the house, of the ancient evil that had taken root here. It's too late for you, Ethan. Too late for Emily. Too late for anything but me. And then the darkness consumed me completely. Chapter 15. The Hollowing of the Soul. I felt like I was falling. No, sinking into a place where the air was thick and heavy, the weight of it pressing down on me from all directions. It was as if I had been submerged in something darker than water, something that pulled and twisted around my body, a vice that crushed and suffocated me. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even feel. It was as though I had become a part of the darkness itself, lost in the void, trapped in the very heart of this cursed house. The shadows wrapped around me like tendrils, pulling at my limbs, squeezing at my throat, and I tried to scream, tried to call out to Emily, but my voice was swallowed up, lost in the vast, empty silence. Ethan. It was a whisper. I froze. It was faint, so faint I almost didn't believe it, but it was there. A soft, trembling voice, barely a breath reaching out to me from the abyss. Ethan, I'm here. It was her, Emily, but it wasn't. Not really. I knew that, deep down. This place, this cursed house, had already taken her. It had hollowed her out, consumed her soul, and now only the broken remnants remained. She was gone. The house had already won, and yet that whisper, her whisper, still echoed in my mind like a fragile spark in the midst of overwhelming darkness. Don't give up. The voice faltered, slipping away like water through my fingers. I gasped, my chest heaving as I fought to catch it, to hold on to that final shred of hope. But it was fading. The house was swallowing her. I felt a presence behind me then, an overwhelming force that sent a chill so deep into my bones, it was as though the very air itself had turned to ice. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Seraphina. Her dark, oppressive energy washed over me like a storm, crashing into my senses, overwhelming me. I could feel her watching me, could feel her eyes, her wrong eyes, on the back of my neck, the weight of them pressing against my soul. Still trying to save her? She cooed. Her voice was like silk, but there was a venom in it, a cruelty that chilled my heart. She's gone, Ethan, gone. You can feel it, can't you? The emptiness in her eyes, the absence of her soul. I shook my head, my vision blurring as I tried to fight the fog of hopelessness pressing in. No, she's still in there. I know it. I can feel her. But Seraphina only laughed. It was a laugh that sounded like shattering glass, like a bell tolling in the distance, its sound cruel and final. You poor fool. You think she's still there? You think she can fight? Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it was 1,000 voices in one, each one colder than the last. She can't. She's mine now. And you? The word hung in the air like a blade ready to fall. You will wear her body. You will be my mask. The weight of her words sank in, and I realized what she was saying. I was her mask. The house wanted me, needed me. I was the vessel for something greater than myself. I had been a fool to think I could save Emily. It wasn't just her that had been consumed. It was me. It had always been me. The attic around me seemed to pulse with dark energy, the shadows bending in unnatural ways, warping and curling like snakes. And then, in the center of it all, I saw them. Emily's eyes. Or rather, Seraphina's eyes, still trapped in Emily's face. The horror of it hit me in a wave. Her body was standing there, lifeless, the skin pale and stretched tight across the bones. Her hands were curled in fists, fingers sharp and claw-like, and the flesh seemed to shimmer and shift like it wasn't even her flesh at all. It was as though Emily's body had been hollowed out, emptied, and something else, something darker, had taken her place. And then it happened. I could see it, feel it, as though it was happening inside me too. Seraphina was inside Emily's body now. I could see the faintest flicker of her movement, of her consciousness, her twisted, vile spirit slowly knitting together the pieces of what had once been Emily. The change was so subtle, so slow at first, but I could feel it. Every nerve in my body screamed. Every part of me recoiled, but I couldn't stop it. No, I whispered, my voice cracking with desperation. You can't do this. But it was too late. Seraphina's influence was like a poison, creeping through Emily's veins, taking over every part of her, erasing who she had been. Emily's eyes, those eyes began to change, the pupils dilating, the irises turning black, the color draining from them, leaving nothing but empty voids behind. "Goodbye, Ethan," Seraphina said softly, and her voice wasn't Emily's anymore. It was something else, something older, more sinister. "It's time for you to fulfill your role." I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The shadows twisted around me, coiling tight like a noose, and I felt my knees buckle beneath me. I couldn't stand. The world was spinning, and my vision blurred with the pressure of the curse, the suffocating magic that filled the room. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then through the darkness, I felt something more powerful than the fear, the overwhelming, suffocating emptiness. I could feel it. Emily was gone. She was nothing now. A shell. A mask. Her soul had been eaten away, consumed by the darkness, devoured by Seraphina's power, and now I was the one who would wear her face. I was the one who would be lost to this house forever. The ritual was nearly complete, and in that final dreadful moment, I realized there was no escape. Chapter 16, The Mask of Eternity. I couldn't move. The air around me was thick, oppressive, as if the house itself were holding me in place, trapping me in the heart of its malevolent embrace. My eyes were wide, staring at Emily, or at least what was left of her. Her body stood before me, still as death, but the transformation was now complete. The hollowed-out shell that had once held Emily was no longer hers. There was no trace of her left in the vacant expression staring back at me. Seraphina had taken her, bled her dry. Now, the darkness had filled the space that was once Emily, and I could see it in the way her body moved, unnatural, jerky, like a puppet on invisible strings. "Ethan," Seraphina's voice, once sweet, but now full of malice, whispered from Emily's lips. "It was wrong. It was twisted. I told you she was mine. Now, you will wear her." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The curse had fully taken hold of me. I felt it in my bones, in my very marrow, the unshakable, suffocating weight of Seraphina's will. It was like a thick fog that filled my lungs, pushing the air from my chest with each ragged breath. I could hear my heartbeat, slow and heavy, pounding in my ears, and yet I couldn't feel it. It was as if it belonged to someone else. Emily was gone, and now I was next. Seraphina had bound me to this house. She had made me her vessel, and now it was time to become something else, something that would endure beyond time itself. Her influence was all-consuming. I could feel it working its way through me, wrapping around my consciousness, pulling my thoughts into her grasp. She was in my mind, inside my very essence, twisting and reshaping who I was until nothing but a shadow remained. I gasped, but the words felt like they didn't belong to me anymore. "Please, please, don't." But Seraphina was unrelenting. "You have no choice, Ethan." Her voice was a low hum, filling every corner of the room. Her room. The walls closed in, pushing me closer to her. "You will wear her face, wear her skin. You will be the mask that hides me, and you will never leave this house." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, to break free, but I couldn't. Every inch of my body was frozen, locked in place by the overwhelming pressure of her dark magic. It was as if my very soul was being torn in two, pulled apart by invisible threads. I could feel myself slipping away, becoming something else. Something empty. The shadows in the room shifted, creeping closer, filling the space until it felt like there was no room left to breathe. And then Emily's body, Seraphina's new vessel, moved. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. My eyes followed her. No, her, as it took a slow, deliberate step toward me. The face that stared back at me was still Emily's, but the eyes, those eyes were black, empty, hollow. They were Seraphina's eyes now. "It's time," Seraphina said softly. Her voice was low, almost soothing, but I could feel the malice behind it, the hunger. "Time for you to take your place. You will wear her for eternity." My chest tightened. The fear gripped me harder than it ever had before. I wanted to fight. I needed to fight, but there was no fight left in me. My will, my very essence, was being stripped away, piece by piece, until only the emptiness remained. I couldn't even struggle anymore. I couldn't even scream. It was as if the last vestige of my soul was fading, slipping into the abyss, leaving only a husk behind. A mask. "No, please," I whispered, but it was so quiet, I wasn't sure if the words even left my mouth. And then, without warning, the darkness surged forward, swallowing me whole. The house seemed to pulse, the walls vibrating with power, and I felt myself being pulled, dragged into Emily's body. But it wasn't her anymore. I was inside her. I was wearing her. The skin stretched over my face, the tightness, the coldness. It felt like suffocation, like drowning in someone else's body. But there was no escape. The transformation was happening so fast now, so violently. My body twisted and contorted, and I could feel her, Emily's, screaming within me, trying to claw her way out. But it was too late. There was nothing left of her. Her voice was a distant echo, fading more with every passing second. And then it happened. The final, agonizing twist. I was inside Emily's body, her skin my own, her eyes staring out at the world with hollow, empty black pupils. I felt her heartbeat, my heartbeat, but it wasn't mine. It was Seraphina's heartbeat, echoing through my chest. I was no longer Ethan. I was no longer Emily. I was the mask. And just as the last trace of my identity slipped away, I heard Seraphina's voice in my head again, cold and triumphant. "You are mine now, Ethan, forever." And then there was only silence. The house stood still. The mask was complete. Chapter 17, The Unseen Chains. It was the silence that struck me first. The absence of sound, the stillness that hung in the air like an oppressive weight. The house had been alive with echoes, whispers, and creaks of movement before, but now there was nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no heartbeat, nothing. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My body, her body was frozen. My hands, my limbs felt like they were made of stone, cold and unyielding. My skin, Emily's skin, stretched tight over me, suffocating me in a way that felt both alien and familiar. The worst part was the eyes. Those eyes, I could see everything, but I couldn't feel anything. The world outside my body was a blur, colors, shapes, movement, but it was all distant, a haze that never truly touched me. I was trapped in a prison of my own mind. I tried to scream, to shout, to do anything that would prove I was still here, but the words died in my throat before they even left my mouth. The sound never came. There was only a suffocating silence, thick and absolute, and then in that silence I heard it. The faintest whisper. Ethan. It was a whisper, but it was my name. The voice was my voice, but it wasn't mine. It was distant, like a memory I could barely grasp, like a dream fading before I could understand it. "Ethan, please help me." It was Emily's voice. I could hear the faint tremor in it, the desperation, the pleading. It echoed in my head, and for a moment a shred of hope flickered. Emily. She's still in there. She's not gone. She's still alive in me. But the hope was fleeting. The shadows around me shifted, darkening the edges of my vision, pulling me deeper into the cold, hollow emptiness of my existence. I was no longer Ethan. I wasn't even Emily anymore. I was something else. The mask. Seraphina's presence loomed over me, suffocating me. It was in every corner of the room, every crevice of my mind. It was her power, her dark magic, wrapping around me, twisting and changing me into something unrecognizable. "You can't fight me, Ethan," Seraphina's voice said, soft and cold, sliding into my thoughts like a serpent. "There is no way out now. You belong to the house. You belong to me." I could feel it. The tightening grip of her power, squeezing the life out of me. The house was alive, and it was feeding off of my despair, my hopelessness. It was feeding off of us. I tried to move, to break free, but it was as if my body didn't belong to me anymore. My limbs jerked, stiff and uncooperative. I couldn't even feel my fingers, couldn't feel my heart beating. I was a shell. In the distance, I could hear the soft creaking of the old wooden floors, the moan of the house as it settled. The air was thick with dust, with age, with the weight of centuries. But there was something else, something new. A faint whispering, like the rustling of dry leaves, creeping through the walls. It was the house. The house was talking. The whispers were so faint I could barely catch them, but they grew louder. They were calling to me, pulling at the edges of my consciousness. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, words that twisted and writhed like serpents in my mind. And then I understood. It was the house itself. It was alive. It had been waiting. Waiting for me. Waiting for Emily. The house had always been more than just walls and beams. It had been a living thing, feeding off the souls it had trapped over the years. The souls of those who had come before me, who had tried to escape, tried to fight, the ones who had failed. I felt it then, the cold, creeping sensation of something far worse than Seraphina's power. The house was alive, and it wanted me. It wanted us. It wanted to take everything, our memories, our souls, our very essence, and lock them away forever. Forever. I felt the weight of those words, the weight of the eternity I was now trapped in. I was a prisoner of this house, a prisoner of Seraphina, and there would be no end. There was no escaping. I tried to scream again, to break free from the prison in my mind, but there was no sound. My throat was dry, cracked, and my body refused to respond. I was nothing but a vessel, a mask. And then I felt it, the chains. Not physical chains, but something far worse. Invisible, suffocating chains that wrapped around my very soul. Each link was an unbreakable bond, a tie to this place, to Seraphina, to the house itself. I could feel them pulling at me, tugging me deeper into its heart, deeper into the endless cold darkness that awaited. I could feel Emily's presence now, faint and distant. Her soul was still in there, somewhere. But it was fading, becoming less and less with each passing moment. I could feel her slipping away from me, from the house, from this nightmare. She was dying. She was gone. And I was the mask. I could feel it happening. The last shreds of my humanity were being torn away, devoured by the house, consumed by the magic, by Seraphina's will. I was nothing but a hollow vessel, a puppet, a mask that would forever bear the face of Emily. "You are mine," Seraphina's voice whispered in my mind, cold and triumphant, "and you will never leave." The finality of it hit me all at once. I was the mask. I would always be the mask. Forever trapped in this house, forever bound to Seraphina's power, forever locked away with the forgotten souls of those who had come before me. The house would never let me go. And there was nothing left to do but accept it. Chapter 18. The origin of darkness. I could feel it. A creeping sensation in the back of my mind, like a distant memory I had almost forgotten. It wasn't my own memory. No, this wasn't mine. It was something older, something ancient, as if the very walls of the house were whispering their secrets to me. Seraphina had always been a mystery, a shadow that loomed over everything, her power so absolute that I couldn't imagine a world without it. But there were moments, flashes in the dark, when I could almost see the woman she had once been, the woman before the curse, before the mask. Her story wasn't always one of darkness. There was a time when Seraphina was human, when she had been like any other, with hopes, dreams, and desires that went beyond the cold, unfeeling grip of the house. But that was so long ago. I was beginning to forget what it even felt like to be human, and in those fleeting moments, when the shadows of my own mind threatened to pull me into oblivion, I would catch fragments of her past. The whispers were stronger now, coming from the very core of the house itself, as though it was feeding me pieces of her history, pieces of her darkness. It started 1,000 years ago, in a world that seemed so far removed from the house I now found myself trapped in. The house had not always been this ancient, this decayed. It had been built as a mansion, a symbol of power, wealth, and beauty, nestled in a land far from where I was now. It was grand and pristine, alive with laughter, joy, and warmth. Seraphina had been born into a noble family, the youngest daughter of a wealthy lord who ruled over an expanse of land. She had been adored, celebrated for her beauty and charm, but it was not her appearance that had made her dangerous. It was her ambition, her greed. Seraphina had been obsessed with the idea of immortality. She had read ancient texts, studied the occult, and sought out forbidden knowledge in the hopes of escaping the inevitable fate that awaited every human being, death. Her father had always warned her, telling her to be content with the life she had, that death was simply a part of the natural order. But Seraphina had never believed in such limitations. She wanted more. It was said that one night, during a lavish feast in the mansion, Seraphina had met a mysterious traveler, a stranger whose eyes glimmered with an otherworldly knowledge. He had whispered secrets to her, promises of eternal life and power, of ruling over life and death itself. This stranger had shown her the first step toward her immortality, a ritual, a spell that would bind her soul to the very fabric of time, allowing her to live forever. But the cost of that immortality was more than Seraphina could ever have imagined. The ritual required a blood sacrifice, a pure soul, someone innocent and untouched by darkness. It demanded the soul of another to feed the spell, to allow her to take their life force into herself. It was a terrible price, one that Seraphina had been willing to pay. So she turned on her family, her own family, and performed the ritual in the dead of night. Her father, her mother, and her siblings were slaughtered, their blood spilled into the earth. And when the ritual was complete, when their souls had been consumed by the spell, Seraphina stood alone at the heart of the house. But the immortality she sought came at a cost greater than she could fathom. The souls she had consumed didn't leave her. They didn't vanish into the ether as she had hoped. Instead, they remained trapped within the house, forever bound to the mansion's walls, their souls feeding the very structure, feeding her power. She had made a terrible mistake. The house had taken on a life of its own, born from the blood of her family and the souls of the innocent. It became a prison, a place where the living were trapped and where the dead would never rest. Seraphina had thought she could escape. She had thought the ritual would make her all-powerful, but instead it had bound her to the house forever. The house became her. It was her prison, her domain, and over time, Seraphina came to realize that there was no way out. She could no longer die, she could no longer age, she could no longer leave. But there was a solution. To stay alive, to feed the house's endless hunger, Seraphina needed to bring more souls into the fold. She needed more victims, more sacrifices, to sustain her and the house's power. So she began the long, twisted process of finding others, finding families. And so it went, over and over again. Seraphina would wait for years, sometimes centuries, until a new family appeared. A man and woman with children. Innocent, unsuspecting souls, ripe for the taking. She would seduce them, lure them into her web with promises of wealth, comfort, and safety. And when they were finally within her grasp, she would take their lives. Their souls would feed the house's hunger, just as she had fed it all those years ago. But the true horror lay in the fact that Seraphina had grown so skilled at this. She had learned how to manipulate time, how to play the long game, how to make sure the house's curse lived on. She would start with a family, and then, over time, the children of those families would be raised, only to fall victim to her again. And when they had children of their own, Seraphina would be there to claim them. The cycle continued. Now, I understood why Seraphina had chosen me. I had been nothing more than another pawn in her endless game of life and death. A piece to be moved, a soul to be consumed, and now it was my turn to pay the price. Chapter 19, The Gathering Shadows. The night was always darkest before the dawn, but I had long since forgotten what dawn even looked like. Time had no meaning here. Nothing existed outside the suffocating walls of this cursed house, this prison. I had long since abandoned the notion of escape, and now, like Seraphina, I existed only to feed the house's endless hunger. The whispers had become my constant companions. They had once been distant and foreign, but now they were a part of me, shifting, moving, curling around my thoughts. The memories of Emily were fading, replaced by images of Seraphina's past, of the centuries of death and darkness that had unfolded in this very place. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't help but sense something new, something different. A shift in the air, a subtle change in the rhythm of the house. It was as if it were waiting, holding its breath, anticipating the arrival of something, or someone. The door to the attic creaked open, and I felt it then, the pull of Seraphina's power. She was moving again, weaving her web. I could feel her presence spreading through the house, touching every corner, every shadow. She was setting her plan into motion. I had seen this before, had felt it before, how she would carefully position herself, seducing, manipulating, luring the unsuspecting. And now she was doing it again. I saw the family in my mind, the ones she was targeting now. A man, tall and strong, his face kind but weary. A woman, her eyes filled with hope, her smile sweet and genuine. And two children, a boy and a girl, innocent, untouched by the world, full of the naive joy that only children could have. They had no idea what awaited them. I couldn't see their names, their faces, not yet, but I knew them. They were her next victims, just like the others before them, just like my own family. Seraphina would take them, lure them to this place, and once they were inside, the house would do the rest. The process was always the same. She would meet them, charm them, make them feel safe. She would show them the beauty of the house, its warmth, its comfort, hiding the malevolent force that pulsed through its very walls. She would make them trust her, And then, when they were at their most vulnerable, she would strike. It was a game, and Seraphina was a master. I felt her stirring in the darkness, her presence filling the space around me, her power seeping into the very foundations of the house. She was ready. The stage was set. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. I could hear her voice now, soft and melodic, but laced with a deadly promise. She was speaking to them, though they didn't know it yet. Her whispers, gentle and alluring, were drawing them closer, pulling them into the house's gravitational pull. "Come closer," she whispered in the night. "Step inside. It's safe here. You belong here." I shuddered, a wave of revulsion sweeping over me. Her words were poison, but they were beautifully crafted. She could make anyone believe them, and once they did, they would never leave. I couldn't stop her. I couldn't do anything to prevent the inevitable. She was unstoppable now. Too powerful, too old, too entrenched in the house's dark history. And the worst part was that I understood. I knew her game. I had seen it unfold time and time again. But now, it wasn't just me she was playing with. It was them. A new family, a new generation of victims. They had no idea what they were walking into. They were innocent. They were fresh. They were perfect. It was so easy for Seraphina. She didn't have to force them. She didn't have to beg or plead. She simply whispered, and they came. They would come. I could feel the change in the air, a sharpness to the silence, the energy in the house growing heavier. She was preparing. She had already begun weaving her manipulations, planting the seeds of doubt, weaving false stories of safety, comfort, love. Her influence spread through the house like a poison, subtle but ever present. I could hear the laughter of the children in the distance, soft, distant, like it was coming from the depths of the house. It should have comforted me, but instead, it filled me with dread. That laughter was a death knell. It was a reminder of what was to come. I could see it all so clearly now. The first dinner, the first conversation, the first touch of Seraphina's hand on theirs. The moment they would begin to trust her. The moment they would fall for her lies. I knew how this would end. I had seen it play out countless times, but what was worse, what twisted my gut, was the knowledge that I couldn't do anything to stop it. I was trapped. I had become a part of the house, a part of Seraphina's grand plan. And no matter how much I screamed inside, no matter how much I begged for release, I was bound. Bound to her. Bound to the house. Bound to the curse. The man and his children would come. They would walk through the doors of the house, and they would be embraced by Seraphina's cold, calculating affection. She would make them feel welcome. She would make them feel wanted, and then they would be lost. The cycle would continue. The house would feed, Seraphina would grow stronger, and I would remain here. Forever. I tried to call out to warn them, but the words would never leave my lips. My voice was gone, drowned in the sea of shadows that had consumed me. I was trapped, watching the future unfold through eyes that were not my own, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Chapter 20, The Last Family. The house had never felt more alive than it did that night. I could feel it in the walls, in the air, in every shadow that stretched across the rooms. It was like a pulse, a steady beat beneath the surface. The house was hungry. It had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the new family to arrive. And now, as the darkened sky pressed down on the earth, it could wait no longer. Seraphina stood at the center of it all, her presence a weight in the air. I could feel her energy expanding, consuming everything around me. She was no longer just a part of the house. She was the house. Her power rippled through every crack, every corner, every inch of the mansion. She had grown stronger over the centuries, feeding off the souls that had come before, growing more cunning, more manipulative. She had been playing the game for so long that it was impossible to tell when the house had become her, and when she had become the house. It was all one, a twisted, unholy union. The family was almost here. The doorbell had rung, faintly echoing through the halls, a sweet little chime that would soon be drowned in screams. The man and his children were standing at the threshold, their faces filled with wonder. The father, tall, warm eyes, was smiling, completely unaware of the darkness he was stepping into. The children, a boy and a girl, laughed and joked, innocent and full of life, their small feet crossing the threshold without hesitation. I wanted to scream, to warn them, but I had no voice. I was trapped, bound by my own memories, bound to the house, to Seraphina. I could only watch as the cycle continued. The door creaked shut behind them, and the moment it did, the house seemed to breathe. The air thickened, the shadows stretching in unnatural ways, folding around the family, making them feel safe, comfortable, welcome. Seraphina was already there, her hands outstretched to greet them, her voice soft and inviting. "Welcome," she purred. "Welcome to your new home." The man smiled, a little nervous, but trusting. "It's beautiful," he said, looking around the room. "We're happy to be here." Seraphina's lips curled into a smile. "I'm so glad to hear that." The children ran off, eager to explore, their laughter echoing through the halls. I could hear their footsteps, light and carefree, unaware of the danger they were in. They had no idea what was coming. I could feel Seraphina's grip tightening around them. She was already weaving her web, laying the foundation for their trust. She was leading them deeper into the heart of the house. She would make them feel at home, make them believe they were safe, and then, when they were least expecting it, she would strike. It would start with a dinner, a conversation, a harmless exchange of words. She would seduce them with her charm, convince them that they belonged. She was so good at it, so effortless, that it was terrifying. They would never know what hit them. But I knew. I had seen it all before. I felt the house tremble as Seraphina's influence spread through the walls, through the very fabric of the mansion. The house was alive, feeding, changing. It craved more. The more souls it had, the more powerful it became. It was a never-ending cycle, an eternal hunger. And the worst part? It was all inevitable. The house always got what it wanted. The souls always fed the curse. No one ever escaped. The man and his children would be just like the others. They would fall victim to the house. Their laughter would turn to screams, their smiles to horror. They would be swallowed whole, their souls lost forever. I could already hear it, the first whisper of their fates, the first hint of the terror that would soon consume them. The boys' laughter faltered for a moment. The girls' footsteps slowed, and I could feel the tension in the air. They were starting to sense it. The unease, the dread. It was seeping into them. It was always the same. No one ever saw it coming until it was too late. I wanted to scream, to tell them to leave, to run, but I couldn't. I was nothing but a spectator, a prisoner to this place. My voice was gone. My body was a shell. And Seraphina was the one in control now. She was the one who would carry on the legacy of death. I could hear her voice in the distance, soft and melodic. "Come closer," she whispered. "It's so warm here. You're safe here." The family was drawn to her like moths to a flame. They didn't even know what they were walking into. And then everything shifted. The walls groaned. The air grew thick with darkness. I could feel the house's hunger intensify. It was hungry. It needed to feed. And it wasn't just the family anymore. It wanted them all. It wanted every single soul to feed the curse, to continue the cycle. And as Seraphina spoke her final words, words that would seal their fate, the house opened. The man and his children froze, their eyes widening as they suddenly realized what they had walked into. The warmth of the house turned cold, the comforting shadows turning sharp and dark. The walls seemed to close in on them, the once safe rooms now contorting into a labyrinth of nightmares. The boy screamed. The girl cried out for her father. And then the door slammed shut. The house was alive, and it had claimed them. From somewhere deep within the house, I could hear Seraphina's voice, sweet, soft, victorious, whispering to me. "You see, it's never ending. The house always gets what it wants." I tried to scream. I tried to beg for release, but there was no escape. I was still bound to this place, still trapped in the prison that had claimed so many before me. And as the house consumed the last family, I realized the truth. There would never be an end. The house would always hunger. It would always claim. And when it was done with them, when it had devoured their souls and twisted their bodies into another part of its curse, it would move on to the next family, the next generation. The cycle would continue forever. The house would never stop, and neither would Seraphina. As the last scream faded into the darkness, I understood. I was not just a witness. I was a part of it now. I was the mask, the soul locked forever in the attic. I was the next victim. And this time, there would be no escape. Copyright notice. 2024 D.W. Cook, aka Dark Masquerade. All rights reserved. This book, The Eternal Hunger, including its content, characters, and setting, is a work of fiction created by the author. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, or otherwise, without the prior written permission of the author, except in the case of brief quotations used for review purposes. Unauthorized reproduction or distribution of this work is strictly prohibited and may result in legal action.